Today we're really fortunate to be joined by Peter Rutland, who is one of the West's leading commentators on contemporary Russian politics. Peter's taught in the government department at Wesleyan University now for about 2 decades, and before that he was at the University of Texas at Austin. About 10 years ago he took a brief leave of absence from Wesleyan and served as assistant director of the Open Media Research Institute in Prague, and he's also been a Fulbright professor at the European University in St. Petersburg and at Sofia University in Tokyo. Peter's written 2 books, The Politics of Economic Stagnation in the Soviet Union and The Myth of the Plan, Lessons of Soviet Planning Experience. He's edited a 3rd volume, Business and the State in Contemporary Russia. He's also the author of countless articles, recently on topics such as Putin's presidency, the Russian energy sector, and Russia as an Asian power. Peter, of course, is with us here in the wake of the Russian presidential election, and he'll be talking today about the status, such as it is, of Russian democracy. So please join me in welcoming Peter here to Middlebury.
So thanks for coming. I'm very pleased to be here. Never been to Middlebury before, so I was very honored to drive through my hometown, as it were, just down the road, 35 miles away. Named after me, anyway. I wasn't actually born in Rutland, Vermont. And I've got a lot to discuss, so I'll just move on. But I can't go without thanking my hosts and thanking Professor Pyle in particular for inviting me up here. And I think you should all know how fortunate you are to have him in your faculty, not least because the last person to get tenure in an economics department in the United States, who's a specialist in Russia and the former Soviet Union, was 1993. Barry Ickes and Vlad Kontorovich at Penn State and Haverford. So the discipline, the subfield of area studies in economics has really fallen on hard times, and I'm very glad to see it's alive and well at Middlebury. So what I want to do today is share some impressions, some images with you about Russian democracy and its slide into an authoritarian regime, and I will be kind of showing you some of the images, but also trying to give you some kind of analytical structure. So hopefully you'll get something from both parts of the presentation. So I think Russia is now a police state. I think the transition to democracy paradigm is over. I was never a particular believer in the transition to democracy paradigm. I never thought Russia was going to become a democracy in the Western sense anytime soon. But now even the people who used to believe it don't believe it anymore. So the political science field is kind of searching for other paradigms. But one thing that's changed is that this kind of authoritarian regime is living in the 21st century. So it's a regime based on new media, new ways of manipulating media and crafting images. It's also based on a globalized society, a society where there's free movement of people, free movement of ideas for that matter. So it's a different type of authoritarianism than you may be familiar with from Orwell's 1984 or something. So I'll start off with this film clip, which appeared very early in the Putin presidency. I have no idea who made it. It could be people not 1,000 miles away from the Kremlin made it. But it fuses images of Putin with a pop song put together by a girl group called Singing Together, which the refrain, for those of you who don't speak Russian, the refrain of the pop song is, I need a man like Putin. I need a man who doesn't drink, who doesn't beat me. My boyfriend just left me, and why can't I get a man like Putin? So that's the kind of general thrust of the, should have put that in my pocket. So here we go. So we'll start at the beginning. Won't play the whole thing. Jack Nicholson, patriarch. Young Putin playing judo. Kalashnikov, the inventor of the machine gun. Okay, fun though it is, I should stop it there. So you get the general idea. Here he is, a man for all seasons, kind to children and small animals, but also handy with an ICBM in his hands. You see, this is carefully crafted. I mean, I remember going to a seminar in 2000, where just after he was elected, where some of the political science people who had been advising his campaign were talking about how they'd focus grouped his image. And they'd asked questions like, what should his wife do? Is it okay for his wife to appear in public at all? Can she open a hospital? You know, whatever. And they decided, no, nothing. They also focus grouped what type of pet he should have. A dog is good, but he actually has a big black Labrador, but that's too scary. So instead he has that little white poodle. Okay, that's okay for public consumption, because it softened his image as a 17-year KGB veteran. And so Putin is both a product of the Soviet era and the kind of brutal, cynical use of power that he was trained to perform in his KGB years, but also a product of the postmodern virtual politics world, of electoral campaigns, of media manipulation, and crafting favorable images. Interestingly, when most of this stuff is on YouTube, okay, when I tried to find this clip on YouTube last week, I noticed that the photos had changed. This copy that you saw now is a copy I had digitally recorded 2 years ago in case it disappeared. It turns out they actually edit it every few months, and the new version is kind of a bit more mellow. You know, it would require an army of criminologists to figure out how these shifts occur in the media presentations of Putin. And the interesting question, which I'll get onto towards the end, is where does Mr. Medvedev fit into this strategy? Okay, let's back up first and ask some general questions about why did democracy fail to take root in Russia? On the one hand, you might think that it's well placed to blossom into a democracy. They had plenty of experience of a communist system which didn't seem to work well for them. They have an educated, relatively wealthy population. They had a series of fairly free elections that produced Boris Yeltsin and a new regime based on voters' choice. And they were located adjacent to Europe and seemed to be keen to join the global community and keen to join Europe itself. And even Putin repeatedly reiterates his desire to see Russia as part of Europe. And trade and travel and other links between Russia and Europe are extremely close and frequent, much more close and frequent and important than our links between Russia and China or Russia and the Middle East, where there are very few links at all. So it wasn't unrealistic for people to expect in the 1990s that Russia could join the wave of democratization that was sweeping everywhere from Estonia to Benin. Why did Russia drop out so dramatically and revert to its authoritarian type? One answer to this puzzle, I think, is the question of the gap between the regime and the society. That one answer to the riddle is that there's a kind of disconnect between state politics and daily life, and that this separation of the private sphere from the public domain obviously is a product of the Soviet system, if not before, that people made their own lives in their kitchens and through their friends and family, and didn't take responsibility really for what the CPSU was doing, didn't really care that much what the CPSU was doing. And there was this gap between the daily lived reality and the grand politics. In a country as big and authoritarian as Russia, that was taken as axiomatic. And what we've seen in the course of the 1990s is a kind of reproduction of that gap, where people interpret freedom in terms of their own personal freedom, modern liberty, as Benjamin Constant would have it, but not freedom in terms of collective decision-making, the kind of ancient Greek polis kind of self-government, or we the people type conception, is, I think, absent. One measure of this is the survey that Richard Rose from Glasgow has been doing for a decade or more on do you consider the current situation in Russia to be normal, a normal society? And if I can just get back to wherever I was. Okay, back one more. Here we see the latest poll results from Richard Rose's poll on do you consider, as Russia becoming a normal society, taken in April 2007. And the Russian respondents, you can see that compared to the onset of the Putin regime, the sense of normality has increased. Now 46% of people consider the Russian society as a normal society. That's normalna, meaning kind of okay society. It doesn't mean normal in the sense of there's some standard of what a society should be like. It means, are you more or less happy with or resigned to the society that you're living in? So if you accept the basic argument, the premise that I started with, that Russia has slid away from democracy, it seems that the Russian people are content with this state of affairs. Okay? And they don't see any need to change the status quo. They're more or less satisfied with the status quo. I do have the Freedom House scores here. No, that's the wrong one. Okay. Okay, maybe I've got the wrong... Okay, I put the wrong... Don't have the Freedom House scores there, sorry. But the Freedom House basically 2 years ago downgraded Russia to the unfree category, scoring them 6 for civil liberties and a 7 for political rights on a scale of 1 to 7, where 7 is the lowest possible level. So like North Korea is 7-7. So Russia was, through most of the 1990s, Russia was being graded as a partly free society with a 5 for civil liberties and a 6 for political rights. Now it's slid down to the unfree category, which puts it in the same ballpark as Afghanistan and Angola and Bhutan, and that's just listing the A and B countries. Okay, so in Freedom House's categorization, Russia has really slipped into the unfree realm. But according to Russian people, this is okay. This is normalna. So why is this happening? Obviously, there are fairly simple explanations in terms of the doubling of GDP in the past 7 years, the doubling in living standards of the past 7 years. Clearly, if people are feeling that the government is providing them with a better living standard, they're willing to give the government a lot of slack when it comes to the niceties of democratic procedures. Others suggest there's more to it than that there is some kind of social grounding for authoritarianism in Russian society, that if faced with a choice between order and freedom, and obviously that's a false choice, because in reality I think you tend to have both together or neither, but not one or the other. But if forced to choose between order and freedom, the argument is that Russians choose freedom, Russians choose order over freedom. And so, again, a Levada Center poll most recently from February 2008 found that 42% of respondents welcomed a stiff power vertical in the country, and 30% objected to it. Now, you could say 30% objecting is actually quite a lot, and that, you don't see 30% of people objecting to it being elected to the State Duma, So as a liberal, you could draw some solace from that 42-30% split. On the other hand, the majority does back the authoritarian status quo that Putin has established. That's also reflected, obviously, in Putin's astronomical approval ratings, which hit 87% in December of last year. Probably accurate. I mean, Russian election returns are not to be trusted these days, or maybe any days, but some of those polls are fairly well reliable, and Putin's job approval has rarely fallen below the low 70s. So clearly, the turnaround of Russia from a stumbling democracy into a robust authoritarian state that's approved by most of its people is intimately connected with Putin's own charismatic role in that process. A second argument in terms of why are people accepting this situation as normal is that they experienced what they were told was democracy in the 1960s and didn't like it. So it's not that they're holding some abstract conception of democracy which is superior. They're judging democracy based on what they experienced in the 1990s, and Yeltsin's struggles with the parliament, the looting of Russian industry, the non-payment of pensions and state wages, and all of those cataclysms of the 1990s, they come with the label democracy on them. Okay. Again, I'll just show some images of this. So you go to YouTube, and you can find these kind of Jerry Springer type antics. This is a debate on TV from 1995 election, fiercely competed election, which the communists emerged as the single largest party. This is between Boris Nemtsov, who was later to become deputy prime minister and the standard bearer of the liberal right, and he's debating with Vladimir Zhirinovsky, who probably needs no introduction, doesn't deserve any introduction. Yeah, they're actually discussing an interview that Zhirinovsky gave to Playboy magazine. So that's what Nemtsov's waving around. It's a famous orange juice debate. So that's unfortunately that's not. This is another liberal. In this case, I think the liberal is the businessman Konstantin Borovoy, who had his own party for a while. This is Borovoy.
То, что вы делаете, это русский фашизм. Я сам что из вас прил, сейчас по морде получим.
So, in this case, it was the liberal that took the attack. So it's like when liberals attack. Ничего. So, while I'm here, I've got 150 YouTube clips linked to my website, so you can watch these at your leisure whenever you want. Can't resist showing this one, talking about democracy taking root in Russia. This was the infamous Pizza Hut commercial that Gorbachev did in 1992. It was shown, I think, once or maybe twice on Russian TV and then pulled because of the outcry. I'd never seen it, but it showed up on YouTube 6 months ago. So.
Горбачев, из-за него мы на краю экономической пропасти. Благодаря ему у нас свобода. Из-за него мы на краю политического хаоса. Благодаря ему мы теперь свободны. И можем дойти до края этой суши.
That's his granddaughter eating the pizza with him. Okay. So, and he was paid $1 million for that pizza slice. You know, it's probably the world's most expensive pizza. He was paid $1 million. When I mentioned this to my foreign advisor, Archie Brown, who is the world's biggest defender of Mr. Gorbachev, he said, yes, that's true. But he gave the money to the foundation, the Gorbachev Foundation. So where was I? Oh, yeah. So the distaste for democracy. So people associated democracy with these kind of Jerry Springer-type antics and were turned off from the Russian version of democracy. Except it's not that clear-cut, because the latest polls done by the Gallup International, who do a Voice of the People survey in like 57 countries of the world, the latest polls from them in June 2007, when asked Russians what is the best political system, 64% of them picked democracy, up from 57% in 2004. When asked how satisfied are they with the level of democracy in Russia, 57% of them said they were satisfied, which the world average across all those 50 countries was 64%. So it's kind of complicated, right? And part of the explanation for the complication is that Putin is telling them that what he's doing is democracy. So what was happening in the 1990s was Yeltsin's version of democracy. Now we have our more Russian version of democracy. And Putin himself hasn't used the phrases sovereign democracy or managed democracy, but it's kind of implicit in what he's saying, is that there's this Russian version of democracy. So it's we've kind of nationalized democracy. It's our version of democracy, i.e. electing me. And the Russians are happy with that, you see. So obviously what people have in their mind when they say they favor democracy is very culturally embedded. And the same thing would be true in Singapore. I think people in Singapore are told, this is democracy. This is the best form of democracy that you have here in Singapore. And they agree. You know. On the other hand, 71% of Russians do not think that their elections are free and fair. So they like democracy, they like the kind of democracy they have, but they don't think they have fair elections as part of it. You know, it's it's democracy without fair elections. But the Gallup poll where they asked them, do you think your country is ruled by the will of the people? Russia was top of the list globally. 80% of Russians thought that their country was being ruled in the interests of the will of the people. Higher than any other country. The global average was 63%. So it's very tricky. These concepts don't mean what political scientists and political theorists say they mean. More often than not, they mean what rulers manipulate the media to tell the people what they mean. So everybody, I mean, even the Kampuchea was the Democratic Republic of Kampuchea or something like that. You know, so everybody is using the rhetoric of democracy, and so you have to kind of strip away what do people mean by it and what is the core of democracy, because I do believe there is a core to democracy. I don't think it's all illusion. Another argument about why the gap, why are people happy with the absence of democracy, is the historical legacies argument. Okay, so the argument from Richard Pipes, or more recently the book on path dependency by Stefan Hedlund, argues that Russia has been on a historical evolution path since, roughly 1500 AD, maybe earlier, and it's locked into a certain path of development, which is a strong state, weak society, no property rights, no rule of law, etc. If that's true, then it's ludicrous to expect Russia could create rule of law overnight. And without rule of law, without some basic respect for procedures and fairness, then no kind of democratic procedures are going to work at all. So according to this version, which is, I think, a very popular version, and certainly people like Richard Pipes are well-respected specialists on the former Soviet Union, it's almost a standard view, I think, that Russia has reverted to a Tsarist model. Now, there's a recent book by Ellen Carnahan called Out of Order, which attempts to refute this argument, and she interviewed about 80 people and went back to them over a 10-year period and was trying to disprove this argument that Russians are kind of genetically averse to democracy and rights. The more she tried, in the view of me as a reader, the more she tried to disprove this thesis, the more actually I ended up thinking it's right. Because some of her respondents would invoke the Tsars. You see, would say, well, things didn't happen that way under the Tsars, or if we had a strong Tsar. And it's obvious, your own history is a repository of your ideas about how things work. Okay? And when she also had some groups of American respondents and was asking them similar questions about democracy, and they would talk about corporate leaders and corporate executives as their reference point. They didn't talk about King George. They didn't talk about Tsars, because that's not part of America's historic legacy. Right? So I'm afraid I kind of ended up partly agreeing with the Richard Pipes and Stefan Hedlund that that is the pack of cards that Russia was dealt. And certainly Putin, with Peter the Great's picture on his wall, thinks in those terms. He's reading biographies of Peter the Great to get ideas about how to rule Russia. Barack Obama is reading biographies of L.B. Johnson to get ideas about how to control the Congress. So I think history really does matter in important ways, and national histories are different, I'm afraid, much as I would prefer not to be the case. Okay, another factor in the mix in the collapse of democracy in Russia is the fear factor. Okay. That Putin's accession to power and the second war in Chechnya provoked great fear in the Russian public. And as we know from this country's experience, in a climate of fear, people rally around a strong leader, or somebody who appears to be a strong leader, who knows what he's doing. And again, it's an unpleasant truth, I think, that we have to go back to the apartment bombings that took place in September 1999. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this episode. It's a complicated story, and I'll give you a brief version. Was that August 99, Chechen rebels attacked into Dagestan and were repulsed. That seems to have been an independent action by Islamic radicals, but who knows if they were put up to it or not. But it was probably independent. But then what happened in the next few weeks is that there were a series of bombings, 2 in Moscow and 1 in Volgodonsk. Explosives were planted in the basements of residential apartment blocks, killing a total of 300 people. Explosions in the middle of the night. Okay, and people panicked, people freaked out. There were militia, self-defense teams guarding apartment blocks, because who knows when the Chechens will strike next and kill us in our beds. It's kind of 3 a.m. in the morning, not a phone call, but a bomb blast. Okay, and in the middle of the panic, in Ryazan, residents phoned the local police and said, "With some strange men carrying canisters into our basement, in our apartment block." And so the police came and looked around and found some phone records or something. They traced the cell phone. They went to an office, burst in, arrested the people, and they pulled out FSB cards. They were members of the Federal Security Service. And this is September 99. And they said, we're doing an exercise. We were trying to see if people would find out if the bomb was planted in their basement. And the police captain who pursued this later died in strange circumstances. A journalist who was investigating it died in strange circumstances. Boris Berezovsky paid for a book to be published called Blowing Up Russia. That's available in English, written by Alexander Litvinenko, who, as you all know, died in strange circumstances with polonium poisoning in London 18 months ago. And he was the author of the book for Berezovsky, trying to put together the evidence to say that the FSB blew up 300 Russian citizens in order to create a climate of fear, in order to smooth the path for the transfer of power from Yeltsin to Putin. Do I know that for a fact to be true? No. Can we exclude it from the realm of possibility? No. Is it likely? I used to think it's impossible. But the more you see the face of the regime, the more you see the way they persecute dissent. Who knows whoever it was who killed Anna Politkovskaya, but she's not the only one. Police breaking up demonstrations on the street. There's a pattern of cynical use of violence coming out of the Kremlin, which I think cannot be denied. So the idea that this kind of use of violence to get into power in the first place also cannot be ruled out. And certainly the combination of the apartment bombings with Putin saying at that time, we're going to flush the terrorists down the toilet, that helped United Russia win the December 99 Duma elections. That set the stage for Putin to win the March 2000 presidential elections, and the rest, as it were, is history. But without the midwife of violence and fear, I'm not sure that scenario would have played out that way. Okay, let's move forward to the present a little bit more, and let's talk about color revolutions and then Mr. Medvedev, or Medvedev, whatever Hillary Clinton baptized him. The color revolutions factor, okay, the fact that there was the Rose Revolution in Georgia in December 2003, then the Orange Revolution in Ukraine a year later, then the Tulip Revolution in Kyrgyzstan in April 2005, all starting with the bulldozer revolution in Serbia in 2000 that removed Milosevic. Okay, there's a whole pattern there of Western-sponsored. I'm talking from the point of view of the Kremlin. Okay, there's a whole pattern there of the West. The CIA developed this really neat mechanism for overthrowing regimes that we don't like, which revolves around creating a grassroots network of mostly students, waiting for an election to happen, waiting until the stupid dictator rigs the election, and then having people mobilize on the streets with Western support, and the West telling the leader, don't use force to control the street demonstrations. That seemed like a winning formula that went one after the other. 4 regimes in sequence toppled. And so the Kremlin saw this color tide washing towards Russia's shores and panicked and thought, we have to do whatever it takes to stop the color revolutions. So hence, I think the crackdown, the abolition of elections for regional governors in September 2004, which came immediately after the Beslan school siege, the tightening of the rules for participation of parties in elections, making it more and more difficult for liberal parties to get on the ballot. All those measures, the basic extinction of competitive elections in Russia over the past 3 years, to some extent it's a continuation of the trajectory of the first 4 years of Putin's office, but also I think it's a reaction to this fear of color revolutions, what I call the Putin's version of Cheney's 1% doctrine. Famously in the book by Ron Susskind, Vice President Cheney is quoted as saying, if there's a 1% chance that Iraq or Iran has nuclear weapons, we have to act on the basis that it's likely. because the risk is too great. The costs of acting are less than the risk of the 1% coming true. Okay, it's like a 1% doctrine. You can make the same argument about the color revolutions. Of course, it wasn't realistic with Putin having those approval ratings, with the Russian people basically happy with their regime, which was not true in Yugoslavia or in Ukraine. And there was no civil society mobilization possible to imagine in Russia on the same scale as in Ukraine. So, of course, the chances of a color revolution succeeding in Russia were exceedingly slim, probably about 1%, I would say. I mean, you know, the Bolsheviks won in 1917, and that was probably less than 1% chance of success. But the Putin regime, having established this pattern of manipulation, of violence, why not? Why not crush that 1% chance? The West will scream and shout, so what? That actually strengthens our legitimacy, because then we're standing up to the West. Okay? And when you ask Russian people, what do you want from your government? Again, this is a Levada poll just from January of this year. What do you expect from the next president of Russia? Returning Russia to superpower status is the #1 choice. 51%. Keeping law and order, 45%. Equitable distribution of wealth, 41%. Continue reforms, 37%. Strengthen the role of the state in the economy, 34%. And so on. So I think the state-building nationalist appeal of Putin is very strong, and it seems to be working. Okay, cognizant of the time, I won't show you all these other funny images and stuff that I've got there. I'll say that for another occasion. I'll just move on to discuss Mr. Medvedev. Okay. And Mr. Medvedev is, as we all know, Putin's chosen successor, his younger brother, as it were, 13 years younger. I've been working with him since 1993 in St. Petersburg, and then moved to the Kremlin when he moved to shortly after Putin moved to the Kremlin in 1999. And I'll cut it down to basically two positions, the optimistic position and the pessimistic position. Okay? In terms of, from the point of view of the West, is Dmitry Medvedev's appointment, election, good news or bad news for the West? Okay. So the optimistic view would run something like this. Well, Putin is following the rules of the game. He observed the two-term limit. He stepped down, which, you know, no healthy Russian leader in the entire history of Russia has ever voluntarily stepped down. Okay, so that's like 1,200 years of a pattern. Yeltsin stepped down when he was already very sick. Khrushchev stepped down because he was told to step down, and so on. So Putin is the first leader in Russian history to voluntarily cede power, if that's what he's doing. Moreover, you can argue that two heads may be better than one from a liberal point of view, that if there's the President Medvedev and the Prime Minister Putin, there's maybe some kind of pluralism of a sort there, and there'll be some kind of division of powers, and there'll be more dialogue. And in the past, the Cabinet of Ministers was a very weird organization. Nobody could really figure out what it was doing, if it ever met, if it made any decisions, what was the Prime Minister's role in the system. Really, it was very, very opaque, you see. So now maybe with Putin in the Prime Minister's seat, it'll develop some real authority, and then you have some kind of checks and balances maybe down the road. Okay, this is the optimistic version. Second argument is the liberal Medvedev argument, that Putin had a choice of who to appoint. He could have picked the former defense minister and KGB veteran Sergei Ivanov, who was much better known in the West, and whose English is better than Medvedev's English, because the KGB was good at training people in languages. But Putin rejected Ivanov in favor of Medvedev, who was clearly the most liberal of the bunch in terms of law professor, used to teach Roman law, had experience working with Western investors, was a legal counsel to the Ilim paper mill that's working with international paper. I guess that's kind of local Vermont kind of forestry angle. Try and work that one in. So Medvedev Also, you can find quotes from Medvedev, like he gave a speech in English at Davos earlier this year, which you can find on YouTube. And he said things like, where is he? Medvedev in Davos forum. We realize there is one simple reason why not a single non-democratic state has become truly prosperous. Freedom is better than non-freedom. Okay. Pretty clear cut, one would think. So that's the optimistic view. Probably the most reasonable exponent of this view is Dmitry Trenin from the Carnegie Endowment, who argues that, of course, Russia is not a democracy, but it is now a capitalist society. Capitalism creates pluralism of power, spreads wealth between, now it's 101 billionaires, but that's a huge number of billionaires. And each one of those 101 billionaires has his own little bailiwick. There's one woman in there, I guess, Mayalushkov's wife, but the other 100 men have their own little power base, which they can use to fend off the state, local and national. So the argument would be that capitalism will bring freedom in its own course, as Milton Friedman would have us believe, and that the democracy can wait for a while, like a couple of hundred years. Then there's the pessimistic view. Okay. The pessimistic view is that two heads are not better than one. The Voyevolasties, a curse in Russian history. There are very few cases around the world of successful duumvirates or diarchies. And you have to go to Wikipedia to find out what those words mean and find the examples. Like Andorra is apparently a duumvirate with two princes. And the ancient Incas also had a similar doubling up system. Didn't seem to work that well for them. So in other words, the rivalry between the Putin and Medvedev, if it becomes based in those institutions, will create all kinds of faction fighting and will not be sustainable. So one or the other will climb to the top of the greasy pole and push off his buddy. Again, a Levada poll recently asked people, if Medvedev is elected president and Putin becomes prime minister, who will wield real power in Russia? 39% of respondents said that both will wield equal power. 29% said Putin will have more power, and only 6% said Medvedev would have more power. Now, who knows? Nobody knows. That's the point. It's unstable. They've never done this before, this doubling up of leaders, a transition that isn't really a transition, so that they're sailing into uncharted territory. Now, it could be that the personal bonds between Putin and Medvedev are indeed that close that there'll be no problem, and it'll go like clockwork. We'll see. The second point in the pessimistic view is that, when Medvedev is speaking to the audience in Davos, he uses one kind of language, but he also is capable, with his interview with Itogi in February this year, he said, for example, if we hadn't taken a tough position on a number of issues, we'd have been treated like a third-rate country of some kind to this day. We'd have found ourselves on the outskirts of social development and would have been an upper Volta with nuclear missiles. So clearly, the patriotic theme also gets the blood of Medvedev going, no less, I would say, than Vladimir Putin. The key question, I think, in conclusion, is the question of corruption that we were briefly discussing on the way in here with Ryan. Corruption really is the key link in trying to explain all these puzzles, I think, because here we have a police state, a law and order guy, the policemen take over and run the country, the policemen renationalize the oil industry, the policemen are running everything, and yet they can't stop corruption. Okay. So what is going on there? Surely the thing you expect from a police state is that they apply the rules. Okay? And clearly that's not been the case. Putin has been very reluctant to clean the house. Okay? There have been very few cases of sitting ministers being persecuted for corruption. There have been a couple of cases like the nuclear power guy, Adamov, who has just been jailed for corruption. But that was after he'd already left office. Again, with the governors, Very few cases of sitting governors being removed at all. Putin has the power to remove them, and then he didn't remove them. You know? The most corrupt one of all in Primorsky Krai, Nazarchenko, okay, he was eventually removed by Putin, and he was made a fishing industry minister. Okay? So Putin has shown remarkable lack of interest in really going after corrupt officials. And he himself is the first person to admit this. Quote from Putin's speech on 8th of February to the State Council. This is Putin. Okay? The state system today is weighed down by bureaucracy and corruption and does not have the motivation for positive change. One cannot start one's own business for months. People have to give bribes in every controlling institution, fire prevention, environmental services, medical permissions. You need to go to all of them, and it's just terrible. The public sector employs around 25 million people. And that's Putin speaking after 8 years in office. So what's going on here? Why didn't you do something about that while you were in office? And I think the answer is simple, that corruption, as Keith Darden has argued with Ukraine in his little article called The Blackmail State, corruption is an instrument of rule, just as violence is an instrument of rule, manipulation of imagery is an instrument of rule. Corruption is the system. It's not a flaw in the system. It is the system. It's how power is concentrated and exercised. It's how regional leaders are controlled through corruption. So Putin is following his KGB training and getting papers listing everything he can hold against somebody. And then all he has to do is just kind of point to his drawer, and they jump. And if they don't jump, like Khodorkovsky, then they're crushed, either by the judicial system, with Khodorkovsky, the richest man in Russia, worth $16 billion, now sitting in 8-year jail sentence in Chita. Okay. So I think the corruption thing is the key to the puzzle, and I'm afraid there's little evidence that Mr. Medvedev, for all of his law school training, is going to have the political balls to do something about it. He just doesn't have the kind of power base that he would need, neither electoral power base nor power ministry power base, to really go after the corruption. So I'll end at that point to stay only 5 minutes over, and I'll welcome Q&A. Okay, need to have a hand. Yes, sir.
If you are going to have democracy, it would seem to me, in any way, shape, or form, you should be having the growth, slow, of a multi-party system. It seems to me, didn't Khodorkovsky go a little too quickly with all of this money into the political arena, or at least said he would use his money in that way to stimulate a political party or to give money to a political. Capitalism will bring freedom. Democracy can wait. I cannot see how capitalism would bring freedom if the money gained, how many billionaires?
101 billionaires now.
101 billionaires, a lot of billionaires.
95,000 millionaires.
95,000
Dollar millionaires.
None of this is focused, or is any of it focused, or is it going in the direction of working on stimulating, helping, creating, funding a multi-party system in the broad sense of the word? Don't they have to have that? Now, you spoke about, what was it, the social grounding. They don't have a social grounding for that, do they? Multi-party system.
No, and they haven't had from the word go, really.
Well, before the First World War, Josh.
Oh, yeah, then. Yeah, I was thinking more about 1991.
Then they had a czar. And they had it rather interesting, if complicated and maybe not so dynamic or freely operating party system. They even had national parties. The SRs were in Georgia. They were, is anything like that going to happen? Must it not?
It simply hasn't happened. I mean, and all these political scientists from the US were eagerly waiting for signs of this happening. And dissertations were written, and the lucky ones got the books published before it became clear that it wasn't happening. And there were problems on the right and the left. That on the right you had the Communist Party, which is kind of not really very interested in democratic competition and is interested in posturing and invoking the Soviet past. And Gennady Zyuganov is pretty hopeless as an opposition candidate. Then you have Zhirinovsky, who was, as far as we can tell, created by the KGB. I mean, he was a puppet of the KGB from the beginning. He was the first person allowed to open an independent association party back in 1990. So he's been a spoiler from the get-go. And that's on the right. And they also haven't allowed real nationalist parties to emerge on the right either. When they created one that looked like it was going to succeed, Rodina, they closed it down. This was 2 years ago. So the Kremlin has been very careful in preventing real parties with real leaders and real programs that can challenge the Kremlin. They've stopped them on the right. But on the liberal side, on the left, if you want to use that terminology, the liberals also failed to create functioning parties. Partly, again, Yeltsin can be blamed because Yeltsin didn't join a party or found a party. He was above politics, just as Putin is above politics, and Medvedev is above politics, right? He wouldn't debate with any of the other candidates, for example. And then the liberals made their pact with the devil by continuing to support Yeltsin, or at least some of them did, not all of them, continuing to support Yeltsin as the best Russia can hope for. But in the process, that totally fragmented the liberal wing of the political spectrum. And then the cycles repeated, and that was already clear by 93, 94. And then the cycles kind of repeated itself downwards since then, with several other phases. So it's absolutely true that political parties are key to democracy. It's true they sprang up like mushrooms in Poland and Czechs and Slovaks, and actually were pretty effective parties very quickly, maybe because their historical legacy was still within memory, vaguely. But in Russia, nothing like that happened. In Ukraine, it did happen on a regional basis. So Ukraine is more democratic than Russia, partly because of the regional divisions. The East-West split gave a social grounding for two oligarch elite-type parties to emerge, and they're battling it out in Ukraine. But nothing like that happened in Russia. So structurally, you can't have democracy without parties, absolutely.
Peter, you said that the idea of having two heads at the same time had never been tried. And the two pairs that came to my mind were Brezhnev and Kosygin, and then maybe at least one of them, rest in peace, Stalin and Trotsky. And neither one was successful, of course, but weren't there attempts at a co-leadership and a division of powers between those two pairs?
Yeah, and people have invoked the Brezhnev-Kosygin parallel, but that was a much more, CPSU was already a much more structurally robust kind of thing, institution with the rules about the Central Committee and the Politburo and the regional, it was much more of a robust institution. So you can imagine some division of labor, whereas the Putin system has no such party. United Russia is not such a party. Everything is run out of the Kremlin. It's run out of who met with Putin and made some deal with Putin. So it's a much more opaque, less institutionalized power structure. So it's not clear how you could fit in the two people into that power structure, because there's not much of a clear structure there. And then the Brezhnev-Kosygin was not terribly successful. That Kosygin didn't get the political backing he needed to push through the reforms, so the reforms kind of withered. So I wouldn't say it's an interesting parallel, but I wouldn't say it wouldn't shift me from the pessimist to the optimist view. And nor would Trotsky, I would say. Just visited Trotsky's house in Mexico City last year. It's fascinating. The bullet holes are still in the wall. You know, it's all preserved as it was when he was killed, because they tried to kill him with machine guns before they got him with the ice pick. Yeah.
What do you think about Kasparov, and do you think his movement really has any hope at all?
Well, the other Russia movement fits into that 1% doctrine story that I was telling, you see. And so the short answer is no. And the more that Kasparov got airtime in the West, and he did get a huge amount of airtime, 60 minutes and everything, the more he got airtime in the West, the more that was grist to the Kremlin's mill. And even Putin in a press conference said, somebody asked him in a press conference in December about Kasparov, and Putin replied, did you see when he was arrested, he spoke in English, so that the Western cameras would pick up as he was being kind of dragged to the paddy wagon. So that was part of the problem, that the foreign connections were too strong. The other puzzling thing that I noticed, which I hadn't really figured out before, why did Kasparov ally with Eddie Limonov? Okay, Limonov, who was just profiled last week by Andrew Mayer, is kind of weird character and fascist. I wouldn't even say semi-fascist. I think he's, a couple of notches beyond semi-fascist. Very strange character. And Kasparov formed a coalition with Limonov. Okay, this was the grand coalition against Putin. Okay, and why did he do that? One point of view is that he just needed the muscle power, that Limonov has 500 skinheads who could protect the demonstrations, this kind of thing. But also it just fit the color revolution pattern, that because in Serbia, the first color revolution, the bulldozer revolution in the year 2000, we had the alliance of the liberals with the nationalists against Milosevic. So it's part of the playbook, is you form a grand coalition, because even the nationalists and the liberals want free elections. So you form a coalition on that basis. But it clearly didn't work. It just played into the Kremlin portrayal of these folks as outliers, as crazy in various ways. Yes?
What do you make of Putin's joining the United Russian Party and becoming its leader, a group of people he described as a gang of crooks?
Right. That was the phrase he used just after he had joined it. So it's hard to say what is going on with the United Russia, and there are a couple of people who are studying that closely. I'm not one of them. I mean, most people figured it's going to collapse because it's not being given real access to power, and it's not given pork barrel. That's all coming out of the administration. So the United Russia is just a kind of Potemkin party. Moreover, when you start to have real debates develop between left and right wings in United Russia, which has happened repeatedly, they will pick up some issue like social subsidies and like raise a fuss in the parliament to try and get some legitimacy for themselves. Putin was always slapping them down. You see, he didn't want the party to become a real popular party. He wanted it to be a party of the bureaucrats, basically, which is what it's become. So will it become another CPSU? Will it be able to kind of incorporate all ranks of bureaucrats? And they have these organizations, the Nashi and the Молодая Гвардия, are also very busy putting stuff on YouTube, showing their rallies and so on. And I just read that they've opened the Mishki, the little cubs for the old Oktyabristi who were underneath the pioneers, because the Komsomol was for 14 and up, the pioneers were for 7 to 14, then there were the Octobrists for the under 7-year-old kids. So now they've started a Mishki for the 7-year-olds, the pro-Putin 7-year-olds. And if you go on the Kremlin.ru website, there's actually a children's game you can play, and there's some school materials on the Putin website to get young people behind the president. So maybe all of that will work, but it's not going to be a competitive political party in the conventional sense. And most of those kind of parties around the world, I think, again, it's hard to find examples that that United Russia could draw on. Yeah, well, Mexico was a real pluralist party with the different roots, right, with the labor unions and the intellectuals and the farmers. So it had a real solid social basis, and there was bargaining between them. So that was a real party with competing elites and very strong term limits, right? 1 term and you're out for the president. So the PRI, which has also died anyway now, wouldn't be in the United Russia is not that kind of party. It's not based in these social groups. So maybe the LDP in Japan, but again, that's a very different context. And there were elections. I mean, more competitive than in Russia during the LDP rule. Yes.
Do you think that the new division of power will require to change the constitution and by the same transform or even destroy the vertical of power built by Putin in the last few years?
Yeah, well, nobody knows really. I mean, the Prime Minister's powers are not spelled out in the Constitution. They've started using the phrase national leader. You know, that's not to be found in the Constitution either. So they're moving beyond the Constitution. So they don't really need to rewrite it because they've already ignored it. But it is strange to hear Putin said, for example, February the 15th, 14th press conference of this year, Putin said, the highest executive power in the country is in the hands of the government. That is the Prime Minister. The highest executive power is in the hands of the Prime Minister. Well, that's, it's not what I thought, when reading the Russian Constitution, looked like the President was the head of state. So Putin is just reinventing an interpretation of the Constitution. It's like President Bush's signing statements kind of thing. So they're in the middle of doing that. But the key thing, I think, isn't what's in the Constitution. The key thing is the personal relationship between Medvedev and Putin. Because if they can divide it up among themselves on a personal basis, then it will work, whatever the Constitution says. If they can't, then it won't work, whatever the Constitution says. I think that would be the most cynical but also most accurate answer. Yeah.
In Brezhnev times, as we all know, there were lots of political jokes. In Yeltsin's and Putin's times, there were no political jokes. Almost, maybe 1, 2. So there were no political jokes, anecdote about Putin. And there are lots and lots appearing right now as we speak. Can you make anything out of it? Why there were no political jokes when Putin was alone in power, and now there are lots of jokes about war with Dimmy?
That might be a cue for showing some more clips. That was a planted question. So my favorite, I haven't been collecting that many Medvedev jokes, but one I heard was, yes, the people were given a choice in the recent election. You were asked the question, do you approve of the election of Medvedev as president? Box number 1, yes, I approve the election of Medvedev. Box number 2, no, I do not reject the election of Medvedev. So here's a picture of somebody preparing the two portraits of the two leaders, and another joke is people say, will Medvedev have a portrait of Putin on his desk when he becomes president? And that joke must even have reached Putin's ears, because in the same press conference that he talked about the executive power lying with the Prime Minister, he said, quote from Putin, in order to build relations with Dmitry Anatolievich, if he is elected president, I do not need to hang his portrait. Okay. That's what Putin said. So what else do we have? This is a Молодая Gvardia, I think, parade. Okay, this is an iconic image of the Medvedev as the baby. I think that's the Russian constitution that they're reading there. Where else are we? Putin and Medvedev. Okay, there's the two together, deep in thought. Medvedev crowning Putin, kind of a recursive model. This is Medvedev, of course, is the chairman of the board of Gazprom for the past 8 years. So this is the Gazprom being wheeled into the seat of power. Okay, then the puppet is a common image. Medvedev as Putin's puppet. So it says Putin for prime minister and then Medvedev for president.
Are these Russian?
This one isn't. Most of them probably are not Russian. The Madonna one was Russian. This one. Here we are. Medvedev is my right-hand man. Where are we? Yes, there's lots of bear ones. I collect these every month or so. The Economist has another bear image. Here's the bear eating oil. And then the more common mode, bear mode, is the bear turning off the pipeline. Also the Economist and Putin as gangster from the Economist. Oil gangster. Bush looking into Putin's eyes, getting a sense of his soul. Okay, ballet. What's that one? She's getting too big for me. The democratic ballerina. There was a scandal in the Bolshoi Theater about a ballerina who was too heavy. So this was the democracy being fired. Putin as Hitler via Charlie Chaplin. It's a German one. There's also Putin as Stalin, also from a German cartoonist. I don't know what this one is. Oh, yeah. Why do people say we're not European? Okay, this is another Putin gangster one. Rather natty suit. Again, the bear clothing creeps in. You got Putin as a bear. You got Putin as a mouse. You can actually purchase a Putin computer mouse. And so he's become a pure symbol, a bit like Barack Obama. He's become a kind of so iconic you can reduce him to these lines. Or if you're that way inclined to go with your Putin mouse, you can have him as a screensaver. Where is that? No, this is the Andy Warhol version. Desperate to shake his violent image, the president took up golf. But finally, to end on a more happy note, is even the birds of the air and the fishes of the sea welcome the president. So, any other questions? Any questions from this half of the room?
I think we'll bring
end on that note.
on that light note, and many of us, I think, will be checking out this wonderful resource that you have, this webpage with all the clips. Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you.